Okay. Good morning, everyone, and chances are, if you're seeing this video, you clicked on a link called newsellerrules.com. And so we're going to talk about the new rules that are in effect all across America this week, having to do with the selling of residential real estate. And you'll also see a companion link, likely wherever you saw this one, of the new buyer rules, which you can watch for your own edification. But we're talking about the new seller rules. And we're going to go back a little bit. How in the world did we even get here to the new seller rules? So there had been a major lawsuit going on last year in the state of Kansas. And the jury verdict came down in November. And among the issues that were swirling around, and I am not an attorney, I did not play one on TV, but among the issues swirling around were issues like commissions and price fixing and antitrust and collusion and lack of transparency and likely other issues too. As I say, I'm not an attorney, but those were issues that were involved. And the National Association of Realtors and other very large brokerages were defendants in this lawsuit. And the jury verdict came down in first week, second week of November. And frankly, it was against the National Association of Realtors. And had there not been a settlement and a change in the rules that we're about to get into, the amount of damages that just the National Association would have had to pay was, I believe, in excess, including penalties, damages, all the other stuff attorneys put into the pot, would have been in excess of $5 billion with a B. So there was a negotiated settlement. And many of you watching this may have heard something on the news or read about it, and there are changes that we're going to go into right here. But how we got here was that. And so even though real estate is regulated by the states, in every single state in the District of Columbia, these rules affect everyone all across the country. So effective this week, and we're in the second week in August of 2024, from the Atlantic to the Pacific and from the Canadian border to the Gulf of Mexico, if you're working with a realtor, these new rules affect you, in this case, as a seller of residential real estate. And so one of the things that you may have heard of is that you don't need to pay commissions that are as high as they were. And the answer is, well, maybe, but maybe not. So for starters, look, commissions are negotiable. They were negotiable before, but people didn't really perceive it as being negotiable. So now they are negotiable to a greater extent than ever before. So different states have different forms implementing these new rules. And here in Northern Virginia, we have our own new forms to implement these new rules when a piece of residential property is being listed by a seller with a realtor. And so, whereas before, under the old rules, the commissions were split generally, not always, but generally split between the seller's agent and the buyer's agent. Now that splitting of the commission isn't there anymore. If there is any payment of a buyer agent's commission by a seller, it's negotiated in the contract. So on the listing agreement, there are now different sections that describe the different scenarios that could come into play. And your listing agent will go through this with you because the forms are new and because they're required to. So in number one, with respect to compensation, what do you as a seller and what do your agent agree the compensation will be? It could be, if you choose, a percentage of a price. It could be, if you choose, a flat amount. And the new forms even allow for a hybrid of a little of this and a little of that, so that you as a seller can say, I'm willing to pay this. And certainly your listing agent, sellers, your agent you're hiring, can say, oh, no, I'm only willing to accept that. But whatever the two of you agree to will go into that first section of what you as a seller are paying your agent, just your agent and no other agent. That goes into section number one. And if that were the end of the story, but unfortunately it's not the end of the story, and many consumers or sellers think, because of coverage they've heard in the news perhaps, that it is the end of the story. If that were, then yeah, you would likely be spending less money. But there are other scenarios. Now, that's scenario number one. Scenario number two would be, what if the buyer comes in unrepresented without any agent whatsoever? How much then, if any, are you as a seller willing to compensate your agent extra, if any, for a buyer that comes in without an agent? Now, you might say, if there's no agent, why should I compensate them at all? And so I will tell you my point of view as an agent. And by the way, we're a few minutes into this. My name is Andy Norton. I am with Sampson Properties in Tysons Corner. I am licensed as a realtor in Virginia and Maryland and DC. And I'm also a licensee in Florida. So I kind of know different jurisdictions. And as a disclaimer, I'm not here representing my company. I'm not here representing any realtor association. I'm not here representing any plaintiff or defendant in a lawsuit. I am trying to bring some clarity as best I can as a real estate practitioner to what I'm seeing is something where the public has some confusion. So why would a seller want to compensate their agent any additional if the buyer is not represented at all? And the answer is that often an unrepresented buyer may have financing that need to be put in place. They may or may not be requesting inspections. They have timelines that they need to abide by. If you're living in an association where there are disclosures for homeowners or condo associations or both, those need to get to a buyer and they have timelines. Without any seller agreed to assistance, if the buyer is totally on their own, is it likely that the buyer that you're accepting, because they have no agent, could find themselves inadvertently not in compliance with the terms of the contract, otherwise called a default? It could happen. So there is a certain amount of what I will call professional babysitting or hand-holding that a listing agent needs to do with an unrepresented buyer. And there are agents that will likely ask you as a seller, you know, if this happens, then I want to be paid an additional amount. From my side of the table as a realtor, that would be a reasonable request, but again, it is negotiable, and the forms allow for that negotiability. It could be a flat amount, it could be a percentage amount, it could be a hybrid amount. Again, that element is totally negotiable between you as a seller and your agent, the listing agent. So we have two elements of negotiability so far. We're about to get into a third element of negotiability, because again, the absence of negotiability was one of the key issues in this lawsuit. So then we have, what if your buyer comes in with an agent? And so as a seller, do you have to contribute to the compensation of a buyer's agent? And the answer is, you don't. You absolutely do not by law. You can say absolutely positively, I'm not contributing a penny, and that is your right, and in that case, zero would go into that section of the listing agreement, as your seller's agent will explain to you. But, and there's an important but, there are many buyers who simply don't have the extra cash to pay a commission, and they will be asking you as part of their contract to contribute all or part of the compensation they owe their buyer's agent. Depending on the part of the country you're in, and depending on the strength of the market you're in, it could be to your advantage. So here in Northern Virginia, in certain price ranges, we're still in one very hot market. And I have been told just in the past week by one settlement attorney that she did two closings, two separate deals, where the seller had said, I'm not going to pay a penny. of the buyer agent's commission. And there were multiple contracts. And the buyer said, oh, goodness gracious. And they would have liked to have had the seller pay part of their commission, but the seller said no. So the buyer came to the settlement table with cash at closing to pay their agent, and the deal closed. That is happening. Now, if the market is weaker, and instead of having a gazillion contracts bidding the price up, let's say, for example, your home is on the market for a few weeks, and there are no offers, and then a contract comes in requesting compensation. The market may be giving you a message. You may or may not want to hear it, but the market sometimes speaks to us. It speaks to buyers in the prior example. It can speak to sellers as to the strength of the market, the positioning of your house on the market. Perhaps it's the price, and perhaps it's willing to contribute to concessions that the buyer may need from you. But that would still be negotiable, so that you could say in your listing agreement with your agent, no, absolutely not, I'm not paying a penny. But then an offer comes in, and you and your agent may say in the privacy between the two of you, you know, it may be in your best interest to try to work something out. And so this is yet another negotiation point that you as a seller can have, that you could, depending on how the market is and your relationship with your agent. If there is a gap and some money that needs to be paid from the seller side of the table, you as a seller could pay part of it. You could ask, as part of a negotiation, for your own agent to contribute part of their commission, if they chose. You could choose to pay part or all of the buyer's agent's commission. And I'll tell you, the buyer has just gone through their negotiation as well with their agent. So you have your negotiation that you're starting with in your listing agreement. The buyer has just gone through their negotiation with a buyer's agent agreement. And here you are in the middle of yet another negotiation where the commission may yet come into play. And all these different levels of negotiation are part of the new rules. These were contemplated by the attorneys who sat down with the defendants and their plaintiffs and tried to figure out what is fair. And I think, subject to having someone correct me down the road, and I don't think that they will, it's the negotiability and the transparency of every single element of a residential real estate transaction that they felt was not there in the past, that they want there now. Is this going to be more stressful on a seller? Potentially, yeah. But look, is this more stressful on the buyer? Yeah. And is this going to be more stressful on the agents involved? And the answer is yeah. I can tell you with certainty that even though this is a negotiated settlement, and this week in August of 2024 is when all across the country this needs to be in place, and there can be no deviation from the practice. There are parties to this lawsuit who feel that what I am discussing with you this morning did not go far enough. And so as stressful as this is on you now, and I have to tell you, I haven't run into anybody yet, anywhere in the country, buyers, sellers, agents, attorneys, government officials, nobody seems to really like this. Everyone seems to be in new ground that no one's really been through quite yet before, but we're all going through it at the same time together. If any of you have any questions, you can either put it in the chat on YouTube if this is where you found me, or you can feel free to call or text and email. I'm happy to discuss this with anyone, pretty much anywhere, unless you wake me up in the middle of the night, because I think that everyone now, buyers, sellers, everyone now is a consumer of real estate services, navigating a landscape that nobody has really quite navigated before. And the more sources of information that we can get, and the more times you can go over this with people who are representing you with more nuance, the better everyone will be, because with understanding of what you're signing, when the buyer understands what they're signing, when everyone knows the obligations that they have to their respective brokerages, then I think we will get through, I would almost dare to say, to a vastly different but still promised land, where the seller gets the money that they're looking to get, and the buyer is paying the money that they're willing to pay, and sellers can get on to wherever they're going, and buyers can actually move into a house that they are going to call their home and look back on this perhaps over an adult beverage someday with a laugh rather than a tear. Thank you all, everyone. And again, feel free to reach out for me with any questions, and hopefully anyone from a managerial or supervisory perspective who sees this as a broker, maybe my broker, another broker, or an attorney, or as a media person, hopefully people will say that over the last 15 minutes that a seller got additional useful information that they needed to navigate a new landscape in their best interests. Thank you all, everyone. Bye-bye.